All right, so go ahead and tell me your name, your major, your year, and your hometown.
Okay, I'm Taylor Staples. I'm majoring in studio art. I'm a freshman, and I'm from Crystal Lake, Illinois, so it's about an hour from Chicago.
Okay, cool. So how did you end up in this class?
In all honesty, my what are the people called that like set up your schedule? Just the
Advisor.
Schedule setter offers. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, advisor. He honestly chose the class for me, and then I did read the description. So I mean, and that's how I ended up taking it. But I was like, oh, I'm gonna stay in this. This sounds interesting. Yeah.
So what were you expecting when you read the description and decided to stay in the class?
I definitely didn't expect this. I thought it would be like the completely like very current issues. I thought it would be like all about Black Lives Matter and police brutality. I really didn't expect it to be like looking internally and looking at our community and the redlining thing. So it definitely exceeded my expectations, which were just the very like, I expected it to be kind of surface level too, you know, but yeah, I'm glad it wasn't. Yeah.
So I guess like how did you like feel on the first day when you got here and he started talking about what the class was going to be like and you were like, oh, this is not what I was thinking it was going to be?
Well, first of all, I was scared because it was discussion based, and I definitely was like, I don't know, I just felt not out of my league, but I immediately was like, okay, I'm sensitive and empathetic to the other people in class, and I didn't want to sound like an idiot. So what was like one of the first things we read? It was about universities, right? And like
yeah, I think we started with
behind Harvard or something, or
yeah, I think that early on we read about
I think that was where we started. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I read that article and I was like, oh wow. So I was like, we're diving much deeper than I thought, and which I was happy about. But then we got to class, it took me a little bit to be like, okay, like this is gonna be fine, even though it's discussion based. And I don't know, everybody in the class though was, and still is, super nice and super understanding, and everybody just listens. So I definitely felt like immediately comfortable in it, and to like make mistakes and learn and all of that jazz.
Do you think that other people in the class kind of felt that way too? I think especially like maybe the freshmen.
Oh, the freshmen for sure. I definitely think when we hear discussion based, we're like, especially when it's not in person. But yeah, I definitely did not feel alone in that feeling. And also like people just want to be sensitive during these times and not say stupid things or accidentally say microaggressions, because I actually have people in my honors, or had people in my honors 100 class that explained stories from like other sections of Bartlett's class where people like would openly say like microaggressive things and be completely insensitive. And I was like, well, I'm glad I haven't said anything, and I'm glad and nobody else in class has said anything like that. Yeah.
So you kind of answered it a little bit already, like, oh, nobody wanted to like be that person that said the thing. But do you think that feeling is something that we have around conversations about race a lot anyway? And do you think that is do you think that's like a problem for when we're talking about race, like that people being really, really just terrified to say the wrong thing?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I really think that people should, and this class has definitely helped with like comfort level, but and we've talked about it, like things can't happen without conversation. So it is a problem that people are uncomfortable, because then that like breeds being complicit and silent, and that's the opposite of what we're trying to do, you know? So it definitely is a problem, and people should feel comfortable. And actually, even if people feel uncomfortable, like just, you need to like just dive into it. And as long as you're not offending anyone, even if the conversation makes you personally uncomfortable, like build a bridge, get over it. The conversation needs to be had. So.
Yeah, I agree. So what, tell me like about like your hometown where you grew up.
So my hometown is very similar to yours. It's literally predominantly white. And my elementary school, I was thinking about this the other day, like there were probably like 2 Black kids, and I don't even remember any Latinos in my elementary school, which is so bizarre. And I mean, maybe it's because when I was a kid, like you don't really like see people like that. But yeah, even my neighborhood and my high school, just all predominantly white. And yeah.
Yeah. So did you talk about race ever growing up at school, with your parents, anything?
Not at all. Like not at all. My parents always like were those people that were like, oh, we don't see color, et cetera, et cetera. So we literally never talked about it because, and this is like kind of sad to say, but since it was predominantly white, there was, everybody kind of consecutively felt like there was no need to have that conversation. So I literally didn't start having conversations about race until literally high school, I think.
So so do you think that your parents being like the like colorblind type, do you think that that influenced how you felt when you got to college and all of a sudden we're in a class where you were talking about race all the time?
Unfortunately, yeah. I hate that like that was the view. And I used to not see the problem, like in high school when people were like, oh, I don't see color. I didn't equate that with not seeing history. And then I took this class, I was like, that was such like a racist way of thinking. That's horrible. So yeah, it totally influenced like my perception before college. But I feel like I'm on social media so much that I feel like I definitely am more progressive than all of my family. But so that made like the transition into college and this class and these conversations easier than it would have been for somebody who's like been sheltered their whole life, in my opinion.
Yeah. So how do you think like social media like played, so you say like you said social media played like a really big role for you. Do you think that that's really common for like a lot of people that are in your class, or probably even, you know, people my age? I'm not that much older than you. Like, do
Yeah.
you think that that is part of like what has caused this class to become a thing?
Oh, 100%. These are just more progressive times. People are calling people out, and I think it's awesome. And I feel like everybody should have some form of social media, because just it keeps you educated, and it keeps you like, it made me a more empathetic person, and it kept me a more empathetic person. And I feel like that's definitely universal for most people in our class based on conversations we've had.
So like what are some specific ways that you think social media has kind of helped like shape the conversation around race for people our age, and then I guess extending especially to people younger than us, right? High schoolers especially, I think.
Mm. And this leads into a whole other argument about like sensitive, people are too sensitive. But I feel like it happens on YouTube so much, where people get canceled over like tweets that were pulled. But no matter when that was said, it should never be covered up, and it should. And I used to be like, oh, it was so long ago, but then why hide it? Why not apologize? People need to be called out. So I feel like that's where it was most prevalent that I saw. And then, what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry.
All right, so sorry, the video is super laggy, so I can never tell if you're all the way done talking or not.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I think it's going both ways. It's all right. So, so I guess, when did you start thinking about race in general? And I guess that ties really into the social media question, right? So like, when did you start thinking about race?
Probably not until junior year of high school. Obviously, we've talked about this, but like elementary school, yes, you talk about race and you talk about Black history, but it's so minimal. Like the thing you mentioned about Martin Luther King, it's literally slaves, Martin Luther King, and then it's on to, that's your history unit, that's your test. And so I guess if you count that, but I'm like seriously thinking about race and microaggressions and making those comments and noticing those comments, probably not until senior year of high school, or this year, I would argue.
So was that mostly caused by like current events, or was that tied into like social media, or what was it that caused you to start thinking about it?
It was a mixture. It was this class, it was meeting other people that kind of opened my eyes. It was social media, people on social media that opened my eyes. It was a complete intersection of everything. But this class especially.
So when did you start thinking about yourself as a person with race?
Literally not until this semester. And I mentioned this in my interview with you, but the whole thing about like having to specify when like non-white people are with you, totally crazy. Like I feel like myself and everyone around me has been doing that like my whole life, which is so crazy. So honestly, until that unit, I really didn't see myself as raced, really.
Yeah. Were there any like, can you think of like any context where maybe like it would have made you realize it without the like academic help, I guess? Like, we had the academic unit on it, like what would it take? Like, what would be the context where you would actually notice that on your own, do you think?
I feel like what I'm thinking of immediately is somebody, most likely a person of color, calling me out and being like, why do you feel the need to specify when a person of color is with you, but not when a white person is with you? I feel like that's not a conversation that's really had, because it's so unfortunately normalized.
Yeah, it's such a part of culture.
Mm-hmm.
So how have the events in 2020 changed your perspective? And then I guess how has this class like compounded that change? So I guess starting like before you got to college, what were the things you were thinking about before college? And then what are you thinking about now that you're here?
Before college, I mean, the Black Lives Matter movement, the first time I heard about the Black Lives Matter movement, I think it was 8th grade. And oh my gosh, totally separate story. My teacher was an all lives matter person, and oh my gosh, I remember like I had a friend who was in that class with me, and we both like, or I didn't see a problem with what this teacher was saying. And then literally later that day we hung out and we had a conversation about it, and she was like, no, but you see, this is why I kind of like didn't like why she said all lives matter, because it's not that all lives don't matter, it's that Black lives matter in this context. And it like opened my eyes to why it's Black lives matter versus all lives matter. And so that kind of transitioned into this summer 2020, when Black Lives Matter was huge this summer with all the protests and the police brutality. It's just like incited like a feeling in me. I was like, I really wanted to be there for my friends of color, and I really wanted to be there to like bring awareness, because I knew people in my high school that were not progressive and would have thought, like, I knew a few all lives matter people is all I'm saying. But yeah, I feel like that's the big event of 2020 that totally like shaped my perspective into being like passive about everything versus being like this can't happen anymore, especially with the George Floyd thing. I was like, this is sick, you know, like a turning point. And I feel like a lot of people were like that. And then the election, oh my God, like literally what you said with your neighborhood, the Trump, supporting Trump because of the tax thing and the whole like their view on immigration, and oh, like immigrants are cool, but they just have to come here legally. Like all of that rubs me the wrong way. And I was like, this is not it. And I remember we read something in class that also opened my eyes to like every president aside from Obama and the whole idea behind Make America Great Again, and literally how racist every other president was, and how the presidency as a whole is just white supremacy. And God, that was really crazy. And that kind of influenced my perception on racism, because I just can't believe I had never like made that connection before.
So with the election in particular, I think like everybody was talking about the election when Black Lives Matter started to become a really big movement again. And, you know, I think the election was picking up speed at the same time. So how has this class how did this class change the way you thought about the election?
It taught me to care more in general. I remember I wasn't even gonna vote until this summer. That definitely changed stuff, but it was also this class, hearing people my age, it helps so much to hear from people and are your age, and it just taught me to care more about this election, and that this is serious. And if you're not like in fear, you know, you're not, you need to care. Like, this is just so important, and it just brought more awareness to it.
Yeah. So how would you describe, so you haven't been at Ball State for like super long, but how would you describe race relations at Ball State? Actually, I want to preface that. Did you, before you got to Ball State, did you hear about the thing with Breonna? Because I know it made like really big news. So if you were planning on being here, you might have seen it.
I totally didn't know about that. I committed really late to Ball State. Although I did have a friend that went here, so I probably should have heard about it. But what was the thing with, was that a professor that?
Yeah, so
or did you talk about that earlier? The professor that?
Yeah, I talked about it in mine. So a professor last semester called the cops on a student for using his laptop, but he was sitting in the wrong row to be using his laptop. And he was also, I think, the only Black student in the whole class. But yeah. So Ball State went like viral, national news for that. And I think that had kind of influenced the way that people viewed Ball State before. Right, I think that kind of influenced that. So if you didn't hear about that, which is one of our big news stories recently. So did you know did you have any, even a thought, like, did you even think about what race relations at Ball State were like before you came here?
Literally not at all. Like, I knew that there like issues with it, and I really thought it was like, oh, it's like in university schools, like, or like state university schools, like Indiana State or Illinois State. I was like, oh, Ball State is the Harvard of Muncie. Like, I honestly didn't think that schools like this, or even like when we read about Ivy Leagues, that was really surprising. I was like, damn, like, I'm really uncultured in this area. But yeah, that's crazy. I was pretty uneducated about all of that before I came to Ball State.
So do you think that that's kind of like an assumption that people have, that like, oh, well, universities are supposed to be like this super liberal place, so of course they don't have any issues with racism? Like, do you think that that's kind of a general idea that you, like, that's what you thought before you got to college?
Oh, 100%. Like, I'm sorry, I say that so much, but yes, I thought it was like most colleges, especially with our generation. I was like, oh, like, everybody's liberal, you know? And then you get here and it's totally like 50-50, and it's, yeah.
So then what, like, in light of all of that, like, how do you view Ball State's race relations?
Do it as worse than before. I feel like I'm just Ball State versus other schools. I feel like, I don't know, I feel this way about many schools, not just Ball State, but we do not do a good job, in my opinion, of, like, there are such minimal things on campus and minimal places to go. And yes, there's resources and the center we talked about and the Big Four that I didn't know about until you talked about it in your interview. But yeah, I definitely think we can do better. I think our president should definitely, listen, I feel like he brushes so many things under the rug, and that's such a problem, because yes, I totally agree with you. Like, the professors have their own views, they don't follow MERNs, and it's super important for like individual professors to be better about it and educate their students and call out their students, et cetera, but MERNs should definitely, he just has not done much to, I feel like, make, but also I can't speak for.
So what do you think, like, I guess, like, what would you like to see, what could President Burns do to change your mind, right? Like, what could he do to change your opinion of him and of, I guess, of what the whole administration is doing, right? Because I think that we all look at him as what the administration is doing. So, like, what could Mearns in particular do to change your mind?
I don't know if this is definitely not too much. What am I saying? I definitely think he could send out like a weekly newsletter highlighting specifically just events on campus, like different talks that can be had and events at the Multicultural Center. And each week, I feel like that's not that hard to provide them space for them to be heard and seen. I feel like that's a pretty easy thing that can be done, but aside, maybe we can build, the multicultural center is being built more in the center of campus. I think it's being built like right behind Park Hall, which is better than being all the way, like, I don't even know where it was from what I've heard, but maybe we could build another smaller one or something like that. But the newsletter is a definite.
So, and I mean, I think that we all, like, we had that talk with, it was the director of the Multicultural Center, and I can't remember who the other person was. We had like 2 people come in and talk in class, and I think that that kind of gave us like a little glimpse behind the scenes of like, okay, MERNS doesn't represent the whole administration, right? There's other stuff happening. But like, what do you think about that? About the fact that there is stuff happening, but we don't know about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that the only reason we heard about it is because we're in this class is a little like, that's a little concerning. I mean, they shouldn't have, it made total sense why they presented to our class, but they definitely like, and I know other professors are like, we don't have time for this, et cetera, but I feel like that's a little ignorant because it could be like a literal 5-minute conversation, take 5 minutes out of class to have them present. And just like, we had people in high school do that, like just come and interrupt the class for 5 minutes, talk, present something else. They'll be like, oh, for this class in junior year, we're promoting this, et cetera, but
yeah, so making it something that's present like more across the university, not just we have this one area that is dedicated to it and that is the only time you're going to hear about it. Yes. So I guess like how then, in light of all of like that talk of like, oh, we don't really know what's going on because the administration's not super forthright about things, so then how have you like, what's your view of diversity and whiteness at Ball State, and how have you navigated that in your first semester here?
God, navigating the whiteness. I mean, I feel like because of this class is the only reason I like walk around campus and I realize that this is a predominantly white institution, because I definitely didn't know that before. Like my view was very like cupcakes and rainbows about school, like the whole liberal thing, and I thought it would be very diverse, and I feel like navigating it, I'm not sure about like navigating for sure, but it's definitely just made me walk around campus and be like, damn, like we can do so much more and to make people of color feel comfortable. And it kind of makes me wonder, like, why are the ratios so different? Is it the Muncie area in general? Is it just Indiana in general? Is it Ball State, President MERNS? Yeah.
So the idea, like the thing about like schools being like really liberal and like that idea that we all had before we got here, where do you think that you specifically learned that, and why do you think that's such an overarching thing in society? Because I think that I see that all the time from people on both sides of the aisle, right? I think that that's a really like permeating idea in our society.
It's most likely because of TV. I watched so much TV growing up as a kid, and it sets so many unrealistic expectations for college and how great it's going to be and how progressive people are. And
so then
I'm
how do
trying
you
to think of specific shows. Oh,
no, you're okay.
Oh, sorry.
What were you saying? Sorry.
I was just saying I was trying to think of specific shows. I mean, Gilmore Girls is one that comes up to the top of my head in general, but literally any show where they go to college, it's always like this great experience. Yeah.
So then, I guess, how do you think that that influences like the way that people see their university when they're attending it, or like, I don't know, the assumptions that your parents made when you went to university, and like that sort of thing? Like, how does it influence our assumptions? Because obviously we have been looking at universities like through a very critical lens, right? And specifically through like a race critical lens because of the readings we've done in class. But if it hadn't been for that, what do you like, how do you think you would have felt about the diversity of Ball State, that sort of thing?
Without this class, I probably wouldn't blink an eye. I would have noticed just because it is different from TV in general. I would have been like, oh, but from the race lens, I sadly probably would have turned, and I hate that, but I probably wouldn't have noticed as much.
Yeah, so like I think that this class has made that a lot clearer for a lot of people, like having specific readings that are about universities in particular, right? That were very critical of how race is handled. What are the impressions that you think like your parents or siblings, or I guess like maybe if you have friends from high school that didn't go to college, like what do you think their impressions of college are as like as compared to how you see Ball State? What do you think they assume about?
Ooh, my friends that didn't go to college most likely think the same thing I do because of TV. And then my parents, in general, my dad didn't go to college, but my mom did, and she had this great experience at her college. And I like, times are totally different. So I feel like her lens is even similar to mine was, because she, maybe not the whole idea of like liberal, but like going into it and not focusing on race like at all, because it just, that was kind of like the unfortunate like norm back then. It was like college is for white rich people, and so I definitely feel like she looks through a lens with a little bit of ignorance. But
yeah. What about I guess like people that went to other universities? Like, how I know you said like the place that you're from is predominantly white, so moving out of somewhere that's predominantly white and even going to Ball State, which is not super diverse, but I think it's more diverse than a lot of smaller Midwestern towns, right? As a result of the university. So like if you have friends that went to other universities, how do you think that they view their university? Like, is there any kind of critical lens because of current events, or is it more just that kind of like roses and cupcakes idea?
I think it can vary on area to area, because I mean, Midwest schools, I feel like, are where it's predominantly white, but I feel like if we went to New York schools or West Coast schools, people definitely look at it through a lens of, oh yeah, I go to a school that's really diverse. And especially I feel like when there is more diversity at the university you go to, it's more talked about, and there's more conversation around it, and it's more normalized, I guess. So there is kind of that lens of cupcakes and rainbows, but it's altered depending on where you go.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So so what has this class meant for you personally?
It's meant just definitely listening to people is the number one. Like, you talked about this earlier, you took the words like right out of my mouth, but not overshadowing people of color and their experiences is so important. And like, empathy is huge, and I definitely feel like this course, and because I know more, has increased that for me. And yeah, I feel like that's one of the most important things, is being empathetic and being a good listener towards others.
Yeah. So what have you learned? How has your perspective changed?
Getting into specifics here, about microaggressions and intersectionality, those are two things that have definitely like changed my perspective. And they're probably the two biggest things I've learned and that have stuck with me throughout the whole semester. Like a little side story about the microaggressions. I don't remember if I talked about it in this interview or the interview with you, but I literally feel like 99% of people like make microaggressions and don't even think about it. I had a friend literally this semester say something. She works in retail, and I can't believe she said this, but we were around our friend who is a person of color, and she literally said like, oh, I watch when people of color come in the store because they're more likely to steal. And she didn't even blink an eye when she said it. I couldn't even believe those came out of her mouth. But like, I might have known that was microaggressive like before this class. And yeah, it's small things like that. I've seen small things like that on social media, and gaslighting people of color, and the whole thing with intersectionality is also crazy to me because I don't like, sorry, I'm so bad with words, but you know,
okay.
Like when you have like everything stacked against you, it's crazy. I never even thought about it like that. So those two things definitely shifted my lens.
Like, do you think that this class has made it easier for you to like respond to seeing microaggressions in real life? Like, do you think that has made you more comfortable talking about that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, we were literally just that instant I was with a group of people, and we all were like, why would you say that? And yeah, it's definitely made me more comfortable. And I feel like there's a sense of pride with it too, knowing that you stuck up for something that's morally right. But the comfort level has definitely increased because of this class.
So do you think that, I know we talked at the beginning about like people's discomfort talking about race and how that can be a really big problem because a lot of people would rather just not talk about it so they don't have to be uncomfortable and just allow it to continue. So what do you think that this kind of education, like how do you think that this kind of education has a large scale impact, like if this were implemented more widely?
Ooh, this class was actually required. Like, my friend totally should have taken this class that said that. Like, it definitely will make people more aware of what they're saying. And I also think that if they said it in the past, they'll be like, oh, I've definitely said things like that before. And then they'll realize like that it has a different meaning to it or a different lens to it that they didn't see before. So just as a broader thing, I literally think everybody needs to take this class because it opens your eyes and it opens that comfort level. And I feel like I'm being very redundant, but yes.
I totally agree with you. So where do you see Ball State in 5 years?
I feel like nothing is guaranteed. I'm just kind of saying my hope for Ball State in 5 years. I hope this course is implemented. I hope there are multiple multicultural centers. I hope that MERNS does get better and maybe puts out a whole newsletter just of events that people of color can go to and speak at. And that's my hope. I hope that it's not only like a thing right now because of what's going on in the world, but I hope that it's consistent. And I really hope it doesn't digress or go away. That's my only thing.
Yeah. So, like the interview guide had, where do you think Indiana will be? But you're not from Indiana. So what do you think about where you're from, like your hometown? Where do you see your hometown in 5 years? Do you think that the Black Lives Matter movement will have an impact? Do you think that
I hate thinking about this and saying this, but I think it's going to take more than 5 years to get my hometown out of this small-minded mentality. Because literally, like, my neighbors and even like extended family members still have the view of all things and not breeding anything and not having any purpose in it. I think it's definitely going to take a while, just because everybody in the town that I live kind of has that passive mentality, and I think that's really unfortunate. But I feel like that's a big thing with small towns, and rather than cities. I feel like cities are 10 times more progressive, especially because that's where a lot of the protests are happening. But yeah.
So what do you think, what do you think would change your town? Like, what do you think would speed up the change in your town? Because I think that we all see like little tiny, like slow changes, but and like, you know, your town would eventually get there, right? But what do you think would it take to speed that up?
I think since I live in such a predominantly white area, I think if there were more people of color that moved here, it would definitely be different. And I feel like if more progressive people lived where I live and had protests, even in our little like Crystal Lake downtown area, I feel like that would change stuff, because it would actually be in the news and on Facebook and things like that.
So you think like proximity to people who want change would influence?
100%, yes.
Do you think that that's
the perfect way of putting it? Proximity to people who want change.
Do you think that's probably the case for like all small Midwestern, or most, not all, I don't want to say all, most small Midwestern towns, Muncie included in that, honestly?
I think so. There are like, because nobody except, I don't want to say that. Like, nobody wants to be racist, especially like if you are in a passive town. I definitely think that's the case. But if you're in like the deep South, like that kind of makes me wonder, like if you are in the deep South where it's just like people are blatantly and openly racist, and there's even like the few horrible people that are okay with that. And I wonder what it would take to change those towns. But I definitely think if your town is like on the verge and they're just very passive about things, then I definitely think that people bringing change here and bringing awareness could flip that switch.
Yeah. Where do you see the United States in 5 years?
Oh, I definitely see it better than I see Ball State or my hometown, just because of the big cities, most likely. I feel like especially with Joe Biden being the president, like I think things are going to be more progressive, even more so than they are. And I feel like people will look back at the protests now and see how much good they can actually do and how much awareness they can actually bring. And I also feel like with our generation, and not to sound like a boomer, but social media is changing the times, and that's only gonna increase because social media is never gonna go away. So I think it's gonna be better than my previous two feelings on Ball State in my hometown.
So do you think that in general, in 5 years, in 5 years from now, people will look back on the Black Lives Matter protests more positively than they do now?
Mm-hmm. Yes, because of social media. And like, obviously I can't predict the future and see what new policies are going to be put in place, but I think it'll be better. And I think because of new policies that will probably be put in place, that people will accredit those to these protests and look at them more positively.
So what like in your ideal 5 years where the US is improving, what are the policies that you think would help make that change? And then how do you think that will change the way that people where you're from think about the protests and think about race?
The policies I'm thinking of, I immediately go to immigration policies and the whole like dismantling of the wall and policies with health, universal health care, just policies like that. And I think like, especially if they're normalized in the government and they're passed, I feel like people will follow suit. So I do think that'll change my hometown eventually.
Do you think that would take just like more than 5 years though?
The bigness of it. Probably. It'll probably take more than 5 years, realistically.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Looking a little more distant to say the changes that we make in the next 5 years will then, 10 years from now change the way people in your town think about different things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
God, I really hope that stuff from this class sticks with me, but I have thought this the whole unit, like the way this will stick with me as a person is if I'm consistent with it and consistently educating myself and consistently talking about it. So in 10 years, with all of this and all that I learned from this class, I really, really hope that I'm in the same mentality I am right now. And I liked what you said earlier about just like not really, nobody can say they're anti-racist, but I hope that I'm continuing to strive to be anti-racist and keep doing that for the rest of my life, basically.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you'd like to touch on from the interview?
I think we covered it. I think that's good.
All right. Thank you for your time.